The sound a Mont Blanc pen makes when it hits a legal pad is specific, not loud, precise, like a period placed at the end of a sentence nobody else in the room had heard yet. That was the sound. One small click in the third-floor conference room at Benton and Hales's Annapolis office on a Tuesday in November. Then the air conditioning unit in the corner above the window began to hum. That was the only thing left moving in the room. Brigadier General James Whitmore, retired, 68 years old, brought here 40 minutes ago by my ex-husband, as a character witness, had set his pen down on the legal pad in front of him, slowly, deliberately. The ways you set something down when your hands need to be free for what comes next. He was looking at me. The way men look at something they believed no longer existed in the world. Richard Caldwell was still talking, 3 words into his next sentence, about projected asset valuations. When the quality of the room changed around him, he didn't notice immediately. That was consistent. With 22 years of marriage, he didn't know yet what he had done. But to explain why that pen fell, I need to take you back to the beginning of a mistake that took 22 years to name. My name is Diana Caldwell. I am 52 years old, and I run a used bookstore on Compromise Street in Annapolis, Maryland, 2 blocks from the harbor, in a building that smells like old paper, and the particular damp that never fully leaves a town built on water. The store is called Second Reading. I chose the name because it suited me. I open at 9 and close at 6. My part-time employee is named Yolanda, 24, studying for the bar exam behind the register. On slow mornings, which is most mornings, I have a calico cat named Briefing, who occupies the front window with the focused calm of a senior analyst who has made his decision about the room and sees no reason to reconsider it. I drink black coffee from a diner mug whose logo has washed to a ghost. I wear reading glasses from a drugstore rack that cost $11. My left knee aches when it rains. Not dramatically, not the kind that stops you mid-step or draws attention. The kind that has been absorbed so completely into your daily rhythm that you only notice it when you realize your body already knew what the weather forecast would say. A deployment incident in 2007. I returned to work 5 weeks later. I mention this now because it is the most personal detail I will give you, and because it is not the most important one. I moved to Annapolis 14 months ago, after the divorce finalized, because I knew no one here. People sometimes hear that as a sad reason to begin somewhere. It isn't. After 22 years of being known primarily as Richard's wife, in rooms I hadn't chosen, at dinners where the entirety of my career was managed by a shrug, being unknown felt like a window opened in a house that had been sealed too long. The people who come into Second Reading know me as Diana, the woman with the knee and the cat, and a preference for maritime history in the back left corner. Someone called me a retired government worker once, loud enough to carry over the paperback display. I looked up, I smiled. I put their book in a bag. I never corrected that assumption. This matters more than it sounds. Discretion is not humility. It is not the absence of something. It is the practiced skill of letting other people's assumptions occupy a space, while your truth lives quietly elsewhere, intact, complete, requiring nothing from the conversation happening in your absence. I had been practicing that skill since I was 23 years old, in buildings with no exterior signage, in rooms where the decisions made between midnight and dawn determined whether people came home. By the time I retired as a colonel from the United States Army at 50, I had done work in this country's name that I am still not permitted to describe in full. 3 wars, 14 deployments, 11 years assigned to Fort Meade, Maryland. On at least one occasion, the decisions made in a room, where I was the only woman present, kept people alive who are still alive today. My call sign, earned during my second deployment, through work I cannot fully name, never officially explained to anyone outside my unit, was Oracle. I let my ex-husband believe it meant I worked somewhere, with beige walls and filing cabinets. I let him believe that for 22 years. Not because I was afraid, because I had learned very early that the most useful thing you can do with a wrong assumption is leave it exactly where someone put it. Let them build on it. Let them show you what they construct on the ground they've decided is solid. What people build on false assumptions about you tells you more about them than any amount of direct questioning ever would. Richard Caldwell was 43 when we met, and he had the energy of a man who had recently discovered that confidence was a resource, and was still delighted by how much of it he possessed. Commercial real estate. Good at it in the way that rewards the ability to control a room. He laughed at the right moments, remembered names, had a way of making you feel selected. I was 31. I had spent 8 years in environments where nobody selected you. You proved. You qualified. You earned your place in every room. Through work that couldn't be described at dinner parties. And being selected felt like a language I hadn't been spoken to in before. We married in 1999 in Annapolis, September. The harbor was doing what Annapolis Harbor does in September, looking like it has always been exactly this beautiful, and always will be, regardless of what happens on its shore. In the early years, Richard was proud of my work. Not specifically, he never asked enough questions to be proud of anything particular, but he liked the idea of it. The pause before he said it at client dinners. Diana does Army intelligence. The way eyebrows lifted. He enjoyed that pause more than any detail I could have given him about what Army intelligence actually required. What he did not enjoy was what the work required. The calls at 3 in the morning, the 90-day absences, the deployments he'd agreed to in the abstract and experienced, each time, as a personal renegotiation he hadn't consented to. The Christmas when I called from a location I couldn't name and heard the television in the background, while he talked to me in the careful voice of a man managing his feelings on a schedule. I noticed the shift, the way you notice weather, gradually, then all at once. The first wave began with Sylvia. She had been Richard's assistant at the firm for 2 years. Before I met her at the Andersons' dinner in Severna Park, a Saturday in October, their house smelling of roast chicken and freshly justified home renovations, she sat across from me, 35 sharp, with the particular gift of people who assess a category very quickly and proceed from there with full confidence. She leaned forward pleasantly and asked what I did for the government. Before I could answer, Richard said, "Desk work, mostly, Defense Department." Diana doesn't really talk about it much, said with the slight apologetic warmth of a man explaining a quiet wife. He wasn't lying in the way he understood lying. He was simply choosing the version of me that required the least adjustment from Sylvia, who nodded once and turned to the persons on her other side. Category confirmed, conversation filed. I looked at Richard. He was already in the next conversation. He had not said desk work to protect me. He had said it because it was the version of me that fit inside the life he preferred to be managing. After that dinner, desk work became the default architecture of how Richard described me in rooms I wasn't directing. Diana works for the government, administrative, nothing classified. At his company events, she keeps busy. At the neighborhood 4th of July gathering, defense paperwork, honestly I've never fully understood it. When someone at a cocktail party pressed, I smiled each time. I drove to Fort Meade before dawn the following morning, and the morning after that, for 11 more years. The commendation letters started arriving at the house, around our 10th year, official envelopes, cream-colored, return addresses from offices whose names I still cannot give you. Richard signed for everyone. I know because he would mention it briefly, setting the envelope on my desk without comment. 9 envelopes, 9 signatures on 9 Federal Express receipts. He never once asked what was inside. I never once offered to tell him. We had built a rhythm around not knowing, and I had participated in it fully enough that it had calcified into something that looked, from a certain angle, like a functioning marriage. The second wave arrived in a legal document. When Carver's office filed the initial asset summary, my career appeared in 2 sentences. Diana Caldwell maintained 22 years of administrative service in the federal defense sector. Income attached, Schedule C. The income figure used a GS-13 federal equivalent calculation, approximately 40% below what a colonel with my service record, deployment allowances, and 22 years of federal benefits would actually have commanded. I learned afterward, through a conversation Marcus had with someone at Carver's office, that the phrase, supportive domestic presence during periods of professional development, had been Sylvia's suggestion. She had a talent for language that sounded neutral, language that could enter a legal document and mean exactly what it intended, without ever appearing to intend anything at all. Richard had read the filing, approved the language, and signed. He had been in the room when Sylvia recommended the phrase. He had let it stand. I read it in Marcus Webb's office on a Tuesday afternoon in September, in a chair that creaked when I shifted my weight, with rain coming and my knee knowing it first. I set the document face down on the desk. My hands were flat on the table. I looked at the framed photograph on Marcus's wall. Him in dress blues. Fort Leavenworth, 2003. He signed this, I said. He signed it, Marcus said. He signed for 9 commendation envelopes over 9 years. Marcus said nothing. He understood that some sentences needed air, not response. The third wave was still building. I didn't know its exact shape yet, but 22 years of intelligence work had given me a specific kind of patience. The patience of someone who has learned that the most important information arrives on its own schedule, and your only job is to be present when it does. He had chosen his character witness very carefully. He just didn't know what a careful wrong choice looked like from the outside. The rain came on a Tuesday in October, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just arrives sideways, turning the harbor into something that can't decide whether it's still water or already sky. I had closed second reading an hour early. Yolanda had a law school commitment. I'd broken a mug on the back step. I decided to take all 3 as permission. I was at my kitchen table, with the latest amended filing from Carver's office open in front of me, second cup of coffee gone cold. The lamp above the table made a small circle of yellow in the gray afternoon, under non-financial contributions to marital assets, supportive domestic presence during periods of professional development. I sat with that phrase, 3 wars, 14 deployments, 11 years at Fort Meade, 9 commendation envelopes signed for and never opened, 31 consecutive hours on station in November 2009, because the intelligence picture wasn't complete, and I was not going to hand it off incomplete, with 23 names on the line. The exact weight of the headset that night, the exact sound of the extraction confirmation at 0400, the exact silence after, the kind of silence that means everyone who was supposed to come home is going to come home. Supportive domestic presence. I turned the document face down, set both palms flat on the back of it. Outside, rain tapped at the window, in the small, insistent way that makes silence louder. My phone buzzed on the table. My sister Renata, calling from Columbus. We talked about ordinary things for a few minutes. Her youngest, a plumber who hadn't shown the particular futility of a week that had delivered 3 problems and no solutions. Then, before she said goodbye, she mentioned something she'd been sitting on. This is probably nothing, she said. But a few years ago, maybe 4, 5, Richard called me out of nowhere, said he just wanted to catch up. But then near the end he asked, sort of casually, whether you'd ever won anything important, like awards or recognition. He said he was just wondering. I held the phone still. I told him I didn't know the specifics of your work, Renata said. He said okay and changed the subject. I thought it was a strange thing to ask. I don't know why I keep thinking about it this week. Thank you for telling me, I said. After we hung up, I sat with that for a long time. Richard had known there was something he didn't know. He had reached toward it once, sideways, through my sister, and then pulled back. He had chosen, even then, not to ask me directly, because looking directly would have required him to update something he had decided was settled. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Webb. He answered on the second ring. I'd like to request a formal mediation, I said. A pause. That's what I've been waiting for you to say. I want everything in the record, I said. Not because I had a plan, because the document in front of me described 22 years as desk work, and truth deserved to be in the same room as that claim. They'll bring witnesses, Marcus said carefully. I know, I said. Marcus Webb was 61, former JAG, now civilian practice in a glass and brick building off Roe Boulevard. Still precise, still methodical, with the particular thaw of a man no longer required to stay inside formal channels. Reading glasses on a lanyard, a pen he tapped against his palm when thinking through logistics. He had read my full service record once, when I'd authorized the clearance summary for proceedings. He had cleaned his glasses afterward without speaking. That told me something about how he processed what he'd read. They're bringing a character witness, he said. Retired general named Whitmore. Business connection, defense contractor real estate project. Richard met him on an advisory board. I kept my face even. James Whitmore. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I know who he is, I said. What I didn't tell Marcus, Brigadier General James Whitmore, had been the commanding officer who received the Operation Silent Reach intelligence summary in November 2009. He had sent a formal one-line commendation through proper channels, brief, official, accurate. That note had arrived at my home address in a cream envelope. Richard had signed for it. It was, I now understood, in a box somewhere in Severna Park. Richard had brought the one person on the eastern seaboard who had spent 15 years knowing exactly what the Callsign oracle meant. He had done it without knowing. He had done it the way he did most things, with full confidence that he understood all the variables in the room. I'd like to authorize the credential disclosure, I said. Through proper channels. 10 days, Marcus said. I'll start the paperwork. I nodded. Not because I had a plan, because the truth existed, and it deserved to be in the same room as the fiction that had been filed about it. I packed one folder for mediation, service records summary, credential disclosure signed, timeline of deployments cross-referenced with Carver's filing dates. I drove to Annapolis the morning of the mediation, in the quiet of someone who has stopped rehearsing and is simply going where the next right thing leads. The conference room at Benton and Hale smelled like carpet cleaner and the particular anxiety of people about to argue about money. Richard was already seated, charcoal blazer, the posture of a man who had been coached on appearing reasonable, his attorney Carver beside him, silver pen ready, signet ring catching the overhead light. Harriet Okafor, the mediator and retired family law judge, had her reading glasses on and was moving through pre-filed documents with the focused efficiency of a woman who did not intend to be here past noon. Whitmore arrived 4 minutes after I did. He came through the door, the way senior officers enter rooms, not announcing, not performing, simply occupying space in a way the room reorganizes itself around without being told. 68 years old, gray-haired, dark suit with no pocket square. He shook Carver's hand, Richard's, then he looked at me. His face did not change, but he held the look 1 second longer. Then a stranger holds a look at someone they don't recognize. In intelligence work, 1 second is a very specific thing. It means I know something about this moment that you haven't registered yet. This is James Whitmore, Richard said to the room with the warmth of a man introducing his strongest card. Retired general. He's here to speak to my professional standing in the defense contracting community. Whitmore sat. He set the Mont Blanc on the legal pad in front of him and folded his hands. Harriet Okafor ran through the procedural structure efficiently. Both party statements on asset division. Richard's team first. Carver moved through real estate valuations. Projected earnings, the precise theater of asset evaluation. Richard sat with the posture of a man, watching things go according to plan. He had the small, satisfied quality of someone who has been told the outcome in advance. When they reached my earning history, Carver laid the amended filing on the table and walked through it without apology. 22 years of federal administrative service, GS-13 equivalent, supportive domestic presence. He said it smoothly, without hesitation, because the document had given him permission. Richard glanced at Whitmore, his witness, his chosen credibility, with the specific satisfaction of a man whose story is landing. He was still looking at Whitmore when he said it. They even had a nickname for her in the Army, if you can believe it. His voice had the ease of someone sharing an amusing footnote, oracle. The corner of his mouth moved. I could never figure that one out. She could barely predict what was for dinner. Carver smiled. Harriet Okafor looked up from her notes, and Brigadier General James Whitmore put his pen down. The Mont Blanc clicked against the legal pad, one small, specific sound, like a period placed at the end of a sentence nobody else in the room had heard, and then the room went completely still. The air conditioning unit hummed in the corner above the window. That was the only thing left moving. Whitmore did not look at Richard. He did not look at Carver. He looked at Harriet Okafor and said, in a voice that had spent 30 years learning to carry full weight, without raising volume, I need to stop this proceeding for a moment. Harriet removed her glasses. General, I was brought here to speak to Richard Caldwell's professional standing, a pause that had weight in it. I am instead going to speak to his wife's. Richard opened his mouth. Whitmore said without looking at him, Richard, don't. 2 words. The room did not move. Whitmore turned to address the table. Not any one person, but the record. Whatever would outlast this particular Tuesday morning. The Callsign oracle was assigned during operations. I am not at liberty to fully describe in this setting. What I can describe is one specific operation. November 2009, Al-Assad Air Base, Iraq. An insider threat had been identified, credible, coordinated, targeting 23 United States service members. The intelligence cell responsible for identifying and disrupting that threat had one person at its center. He set his hands flat on the table. She stayed on station for 31 consecutive hours without relief. The extraction window had closed. The situation had deteriorated past the point where most analysts would have handed it off and called that acceptable. She did not hand it off because the intelligence picture was not complete, and she was not going to present an incomplete picture with 23 names on the line. The harbor outside was perfectly still. When the operation concluded, all 23 service members were extracted safely. I received the intelligence summary at 0600 the following morning. I remember the exact coordinates. I remember the exact report time. I have not forgotten a single name on that extraction manifest in 15 years. He folded his hands. Richard Caldwell brought me here to speak to his credibility. Whitmore's voice had not changed register once. He did not tell me who he was bringing me here to face. I don't believe he knew. He looked directly at Richard for the first time. You have described your wife's career as administrative in legal documents filed with this court. You used the words desk work in this room 14 minutes ago in front of me. The ceiling fan in the adjacent corridor was the only sound. She is a retired colonel in the United States Army Intelligence Corps. Her call sign is Oracle. I was the commanding officer who received the intelligence report that earned her that designation. I will not be testifying on your behalf today. He picked the pen up. I believe what needed to be said has been said. I had not moved. My hands were flat on the table, and I was looking at the water pitcher in the center of it, because if I looked at Richard's face, I could not guarantee the quality of stillness I had maintained for 22 years, of choosing not to correct assumptions. Harriet Okafor put her glasses back on. 15 minutes, she said. Richard did not speak to me during the break. I went to the window and stood with one hand resting on the sill, watching the harbor. A man on the dock below was coiling rope in even loops, not harrying, with the patience of someone who does the same task in all kinds of weather and has long stopped measuring it against anything else. I watched him until the 15 minutes were done. The rest of the mediation moved, with a different quality. Harriet Okafor was not a theatrical woman, but she was a precise one, and precision, in a room that had just witnessed what that room witnessed, lands harder than theater. The GS-13 equivalent calculation was removed from the filing within 40 minutes. The revised calculation, Colonel's compensation package, full deployment allowances, 22 years of federal benefits combined, put the total difference at $1.3 million across the service history. $1.3 million that Carver's filing had quietly omitted by describing my career as administrative service. When the revised number appeared on the table, Carver went very still. He looked at it for a long moment. He did not look at Richard. Richard sat beside him and said almost nothing for the remainder of the session. He had the look of a man who has walked confidently through a door and found the floor arranged completely differently from the plans, not broken, recalibrating, in real time, in front of the people he had brought here to impress. Whitmore shook my hand in the hallway. When it was over, firm, brief, 1 second. Then he walked to the elevator. He had said what needed to be said, and people who understand exactly when something is finished do not pad the ending. I took the stairs. In the lobby, a woman came through the revolving door with a stroller and a toddler who had dropped something on the marble floor and was devastated in the complete, immediate way that 2-year-olds are devastated. No history of not being devastated. No anticipation of its ending. I thought about her for the whole drive home. The clarity of knowing exactly what you'd lost and making no attempt to appear otherwise. I drove back to second reading, parked in the alley, sat in the car with the engine off. Briefing was in the window, monitoring the street with professional disinterest. Yolanda had gone. The store was quiet and smelled like old paper, and the harbor 2 blocks away, and the particular life I had chosen to build here on purpose. I went into the back room, made tea, sat in the old chair, held the warmth of the mug between both palms for a long time without drinking it. It did not feel like winning. I want to be exact about that. It felt like the end of carrying something very heavy, for a very long time. Not triumph, not the dramatic exhale of a story resolving, just the specific physical relief of setting something down and feeling what your hands actually are, when they're not full. 6 months after the mediation, Sylvia moved to Portland. She posted photographs of trails and artisan coffee shops with captions about new chapters and choosing peace. Richard's defense contractor real estate project dissolved when two of his business partners, upon learning there had been a federal credential inquiry connected to the case, quietly withdrew. He sold the Georgetown condo, the one he had described to me as an investment, and to Sylvia as a home, and moved to an apartment near Rockville Pike, a smaller firm, last I heard, a fraction of his former billings, a much smaller office, with a view of a parking structure. These are not the things I think about most often. 3 weeks after the mediation, Richard called on a Sunday evening. I watched his name on the screen through 3 rings. Then I answered. He didn't say hello. He said, "The question I asked your sister, years ago, whether you'd won anything important." The harbor outside was hammered silver in November light. "I remember," I said. "I knew there were things I didn't understand about your work," he said, and I chose, over and over again, not to look at them directly, because looking directly would have required me to change how I understood what we were. And I wasn't willing to do that. A pause, a car slowing for a light, somewhere on his end. I should have been willing to do that. I stood at the window and let him continue. "I have a storage unit in Severna Park, $45 a month for 7 years. There's a box in it." His voice had shed its commercial register entirely. "Every newspaper clipping I could find, with your name in it, DoD press releases, 1 congressional report. Anywhere you appeared in the public record, and all 9 commendation envelopes. I signed for them. I put them in the box. I never opened them. But I didn't throw them away, Diana. I kept them. I put my hand on the kitchen counter." Richard had spent 22 years choosing not to know who I was. He had let Sylvia put language into legal filings that described 22 years as desk work. He had said the word oracle in front of the one man on the eastern seaboard who could not let it pass. He had built an entire argument about our shared life on the version of me that required the least adjustment to his own, and in Severna Park, for $45 a month, he had kept every piece of evidence that the version was false. He had chosen not to know. He had also chosen not to let go of proof. I turned that over for a long time after we hung up, carefully, without rushing. The way you examine a problem that has more dimensions than you initially assigned it. He had not chosen ignorance because he didn't care. He had chosen it because caring fully, with his eyes open, would have required him to grow. And somewhere in the gap, between what he chose and what he kept, that box, those envelopes, those $45 every month for 7 years, there was something that wasn't quite love, and wasn't quite its absence. It was the thing he had never found the right room for. I had spent 22 years in rooms that couldn't be named. We had coffee eventually, a diner off Route 2 that neither of us had history with, formica tables, thick white mugs, a corner booth with a window facing the parking lot. He brought the box. He set it on the seat beside him without explanation, and I sat across from him and we ordered and talked about things that were not the box for 40 minutes before either of us reached for it. When I opened the first envelope, the 2011 one, with the return address that made the waitress pause briefly when she came to refill our mugs, Richard watched me read it. He didn't speak. He had the expression of someone encountering the geography of a country they have been living next to for 22 years, and never once unfolded the map. "I'm sorry," he said after a while. "I know," I said. "I don't think that covers it." "No," I said. "It doesn't." He nodded. He didn't reach for more words, to cover what words couldn't cover. Richard had always believed that talking could repair what talking had built. This was one of the first times I had seen him understand that some gaps don't close by continuing to speak into them. We are not what we were, we will not be. 22 years of chosen not knowing don't get rebuilt over bad diner coffee and 9 old envelopes. But he is the only person alive who knew me at 31, before I understood the full weight of what I was capable of. And that is not nothing. I am still deciding what to do with it. That feels, after this long, like exactly the right place to be. I drove home in the early dark, with the box on the passenger seat and the harbor ahead of me lit the way Annapolis lights up in November, when the restaurants are still open and the boats are docked, and the water goes on existing, with complete indifference to what happens on its shore. Briefing was in the window when I got back. The life I had built here was exactly where I had left it. I made tea, sat in the back room, held the old commendation letter for a while. The truth had been in a box in Severna Park for 9 years. It had not needed my help to stay true. It had simply waited, patient, specific, complete, requiring nothing from the silence around it. That I have come to understand is what patience actually is. If you have spent years inside a life where the most important things about you were treated as negligible, not with cruelty, but with the quiet, comfortable choice of someone who loved the version of you that didn't ask them to see clearly, I want you to hear this. The truth about who you are does not need your constant advocacy to survive. It needs only that you survive, that you remain present, that you do not reduce yourself to fit the story someone else found easier to tell. Silence is not weakness. Choosing not to correct an assumption is not surrender. Sometimes it is the most efficient form of patience, waiting for the room to arrange itself correctly. Without your help, it will arrange itself. The truth is patient, it is specific, it is complete, with or without a witness, in a named room or a box in Savannah Park. And when the right person finally says the right word, in the wrong room it surfaces, every time. If this story reminded you of someone who has been carrying something extraordinary in ordinary silence, someone who has been earning things the common room hasn't yet recognized, share it with them today. Tell them you see them. Some people have been waiting a long time to hear exactly that. Don't make them wait any longer. Oracle didn't mean I could see the future. It meant I had learned, through 22 years of watching what people choose not to know. Through 9 envelopes signed for and never opened, through a call sign said mockingly, in front of the one man in the room who understood exactly what it had cost, that the truth never needs a press release. It never needs the room to go quiet. It simply waits, patient, specific, entirely complete. And when the right person finally says the right word, in the wrong room it surfaces, every time.